here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is misalignment and suffering. And what we get to explore is the dynamic of, of suffering and how it seems to be linked with internal conflict to a great degree, and in many circumstances anyway. Anyway, we'll get to explore that together. And before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together and vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, and the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So good to be here with you this morning. So today we're talking about misalignment and suffering. So suffering, if we look at it in relation to internal conflict, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about how we can really struggle and suffer when we're trying to hold two different experiences of something. So I've been talking a bit about my cat passing, my beloved Jewel cat, who was with me for 18 and a half years. And I want to honor her. For those of you who've met her through this morning conversation, I want to honor her and just acknowledge how magnificent a spirit she was and is in my life. And this conflict, I think, that spurred this conversation was a conflict over whether to help her pass or to allow her, to just move through that process naturally, and witnessing her decline and her suffering. And so for me, there was a very deep conflict about choosing to help her pass. I believe that she was aligned with it, and there was still the inner conflict, and there was suffering around that. There was guilt and self-doubt, looking at, was I being selfish in assisting her to pass? And there still is some residual angst around that. And I recognize that I've sort of been suffering with it. And I think that dynamic of inner conflict, holding two potentials and not being able to reconcile them, can be extremely challenging and painful, where we second guess ourselves, where we don't have the certainty or the clarity to make a definitive decision. And maybe when, no matter what the decision is, it's painful. So the suffering part comes from revisiting it and churning it over and over and over again, and questioning ourselves again and again and again. So I think, well, I've spoken this before. I had the opportunity to assist at an event with the Dalai Lama over the course of a week some years ago. And the thing that has most profoundly stuck with me from that experience was a quote from him where he said that all suffering is a result of misconceptualization, the way that we're thinking about things. And I guess there's a case to be made that our experience of our lives resides in our thinking about things to a very great degree, resides in the context that through which we view the world. And it's very common for us to get caught in loops, repetitive thought loops of questioning or doubting or repeating, just simply repeating the endless loop. I think we've all been there, where we cannot find our way out of this sort of circular pattern of thought that leads us back to the same place. I just noticed that with this internal entertainment of conflicting perspectives, it can trigger a whole pattern of self-punishment, suffering, second guessing. And I guess the thing to be looking at is that through that process, ideally and ultimately, we can and maybe hope to find some kind of reconciliation, some kind of resolution. Because without that resolution, we can continue to perpetuate that conflict for years and years and years. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. We're talking about misalignment and suffering and holding conflicting perspectives and ideas and bouncing back and forth endlessly, and how that can be so disruptive until we can find some kind of reconciliation. There is all kinds of potential that resides within that kind of conflict, because there's so much energy, this energy of opposition that is very uncomfortable to hold. And there's a point at which if we allow ourselves to hold those contradictions, those conflicts, if we can hold it long enough and be in the discomfort of it and allow that energy to do its thing, so to speak, to activate, what can happen is that a new perspective emerges, something that is nonlinear, that is a transition that might not have been able to, that one might not even have been able to conceive of without that conflict. Like the conflict just continues and continues until somehow there's a quantum shift of awareness that brings us to a new insight, a new perspective, a new dimension of understanding that, as I said, is not a linear progression. And on some level, perhaps it's a surrender to recognize that those seemingly opposing factors are part of one and the same thing. So we've spoken a lot about this framework called the triad. Good morning, Dido. So good to be with you this morning. I'm so delighted to have you joining us. We're talking about misalignment and suffering, and really what we're talking about, I guess, is reconciliation, is finding a place where these seemingly opposing influences are part of a greater whole, where they're not really opposing at all. So I was talking about the triad, the framework, where there's an activating force and a restraining force. And it is these two pieces that are sort of vibrating together and seemingly in a seemingly irreconcilable way, until something new emerges. And maybe it's through surrender, maybe it's through grace, but at some point there's another perspective that emerges that kind of unifies and reconciles those conflicts. And we can think about it as the third side of a coin. So it's not that a coin has only two sides. The reconciling part of the coin, if we were going to separate it, instead of saying, well, then you have the whole coin, but there's a side of the coin, and that brings it all together so that it becomes all one. And I think that that's what we're looking at here is, yes, for instance, in this situation with Jewel, I have the grief of losing her, the desire to have kept her with me longer, the desire to spare her suffering, there are all these different emotions, guilt, for helplessness, all of these different feelings that conflict, love, of course, the selfishness of uh, wanting to keep her with me, and also wanting to proceed with the the call of my life, that that make it or made it inconvenient to be having to care for her, at the same time that I deeply care for her. You know, the grief at losing her and the relief of not having the responsibility, all of these things that conflict, and then we tend to judge ourselves for those feelings. One of the things that is so challenging about this transition, or the transition of a loved one, is that all these feelings coexist. All of these feelings occur all at the same time, and they're all over the place. There's such a spectrum that they don't there's not necessarily, at least for me, there wasn't a consistent, clear, this is how it is. It was kind of all over the place, and self-judgment along with it, and not not knowing with absolute certainty what was right, and what was to her highest good, what was to my highest good, how we reconcile those things. So Rosalind says, sad and beautiful at the same time. I'm sorry to hear the news. Ooh, thank you, Rosalind. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's just to pay tribute to her. She was magnificent until the very end. I mean, through the very end. Jewel was such a demonstrative spirit. Like, she knew herself and she knew her will. And the last day, even though she hadn't been eating, she asked for food. And I gave her some tuna fish, and she always liked drink the liquid more than the food. So she lapped up the liquid from the tuna, and that was her last meal. And I had been taking her outside every day, and the several days prior to her last day, which was last Wednesday, I would carry her up and down the steps. And that day is 14 steps. She could barely walk. She walked up all the steps herself. She was very, very strong-willed. She knew herself. And then when the doctor came, thankfully I was able to find somebody to come to be able to help her pass from home. The doctor asked me where I wanted to be with her. And I had a ramp that went up to my bed because Jewel couldn't really jump very much anymore. And again, she could barely walk, but she walked up the ramp and walked herself over to where I sleep in the bed, and she laid herself down there, saying that's where she wanted to find her final rest. And it was so very, very beautiful to see her will, to be able to honor her and see her. And there was still a lot of conflict that I felt. Um, and holding love and grief and relief and sorrow and um, uncertainty, holding all these emotions that are going all over the place, holding them all at once. I guess it's the resistance that causes the suffering rather than just allowing all of those emotions. Dido says, I was lucky enough to spend time with Jewel. She was unique with her jewel-like eyes, and she was so curious and exploratory like no other. Yeah, so Dido, thank you so much for sharing that. So Dido and I got to travel together and in September, where I had the month off and I had an invitation from friends to visit in California. And I couldn't leave Jewel. In fact, I thought she would die. On the trip I took her, she and I drove cross country to and from California, and we got to meet up with Dido on our way. And Jewel got a second life. She came to life in a way that I hadn't seen her for years. And she just had an incredible trip. And from September until the couple weeks where she was dying, really actively dying, she really had revitalized, and she always was tremendously curious and engaged. And it was such a blessing to have that trip with her and to share her with other people and with you, Dido, who I love so deeply. Yeah, so I think death brings a unique set of contradictory kinds of emotions and conflict, particularly when it's well, I think probably uniformly, because we're typically anyway holding grief and love, sometimes anger, at someone for abandoning us in some way, or and then the self-judgment around whatever those feelings are. So there might be shame, there might be guilt, there might be regret. There's just all this flood of seemingly irreconcilable emotions, and holding all of that can be experienced as suffering. And so granting ourselves the truth that we are not one thing, that all those seeming contradictions can exist all at once in the context of our humanity. That we have this level of complexity in our being, to be able to come to a place of acceptance and maybe it's that these kinds of circumstances bring forth the richness of our humanity, the capacity to be having this spectrum of experience, of emotional experience, all at the same time. The I think the suffering comes from resisting the fact that it's all there, that we're all of it. It's just that it doesn't generally come in such rapid succession. It doesn't generally come all at once where we have all the feelings all at the same time. And it's a lot of energetic input that is kind of all over the place. Partly, I think, because death particularly is so unfathomable to us, so foreign, so unintelligible, trying to make sense of of something that doesn't make sense. And so when we're able to find a place of alignment, which might be acceptance, like being able to say, okay, the alignment is that all of this exists all at the same time. And that's just part of being human. That's an expression of humanity that can, maybe that can help us to find an alignment, an acceptance that then allows the suffering part to dissolve. And we can just experience all the emotions without trying to make them make sense. So, as always, releasing the resistance is our path to peace, I think. So thank you for celebrating Jewel with me. And I so deeply appreciate you holding her in your heart, as do I. Oh, so much emotion. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like and follow. Dido says, I do hold her in my heart. Thank you, Dido. Thank you. So I so deeply appreciate you, all of you, to be able to have the opportunity to explore our humanity together and to just support one another in the richness of this journey. So until next time, so much love to you.